There are 10 seconds on the clock in the fourth and final quarter of this high school girls basketball game. Sacred Heart Academy has the ball at midcourt. 4 quarters of an effective full court press, fast breaking, and launching threes is about to come down to the final possession. On the inbound, Sacred Heart quickly gets the ball up the floor. Their point guard works off a double staggered screen and gets open for a deep three at the buzzer. She pulls the trigger, and as time expires, drains a three-pointer to end the game. Final score, Sacred Heart 92, West Haven 4. Well, shortly after this game, Sacred Heart Academy's head coach was suspended for what can only be described as a classless display of running up the score on an opponent, and thus help fuel the debate that wages on today. How do we feel about those coaches and teams who run up the score, and what constitutes running up the score? And does the score have to be completely lopsided in order to fall in this category? Well, this particular discussion has a very slippery slope and somewhat of a gray line. It's governed by subjectivity and not objectivity, and therefore may not have any clear parameters. But here's what we do know. There will always be blowouts. There will always be teams who dominate their opponents so badly that the score gets lopsided. Those games are going to happen, and they're going to happen a lot. And those games, most of the time, don't push any ethical boundaries. But we aren't talking about those obvious mismatches. What we are talking about is more how a team does it. You see, the final score doesn't always paint an accurate picture. There's always a game within the game. For example, let's take 2 scenarios. Let's say a football team wins 67-7. For 2 or maybe even 3 quarters, they played their starters, who then gave away to the reserves. For the first 2.5 quarters, the playbook was wide open and every conceivable play was an option. However, in the second half, the dominant team shut it down a little bit, ran the ball, working on some other things to get better. Final score, 67-7. Are they guilty of sportsmanship malpractice? Scenario 2. A team is up a couple of scores with a minute to go, and instead of taking a knee to run out the clock, they jump into a hurry-up offense with their starters to try and get one more score to increase that margin of victory. Final score, 30-8. Now, did this team push the ethical envelope? That's the interesting thing about this argument. The final score doesn't always tell the story. However, we know an ethics breach when we see it, and it comes in many different forms. Although it isn't an every week occurrence, and the vast majority of our coaches are incredible leaders and people, it does happen from time to time. And for me, the guy that loves to dive into the psychology of things, the interesting question becomes the why. Why do some coaches feel it necessary to humiliate an opponent and embarrass another team? Well, let me ask you something. Do records and stats trump sportsmanship? Does embarrassing another team give you more street cred? Is this a byproduct of max preps? You know, we talk a lot about losing with grace, but what about winning with character? You know, it's said that the actions of players and coaches reflect the character of their hometown and the people who live in it. So it's always a good idea for coaches to remember what's on the front of their jersey and not what's written on the back. Sometimes we have to remind ourselves that this is only a game and that we need to be developers of young men and women more than the coach of a sport. I think the why is wrapped up in a culture that has lost the meaning of the word respect. We see a lack of respect in the hallways of our schools. We see it around town. We see it sometimes in our leaders. You see, coaches may not be the reason that kids come out for sports, but they sure as heck are the main reason they stay out for sports. The power coaches yield is immense, and their value system is the blueprint used by our athletes as they mature. Our job as coaches is to teach young athletes to be good human beings first. The other stuff, the college scholarships, playing after high school, the winning, that comes a lot easier when you're a good person doing the right things. Look, I've coached a long time. And I'm all about the warrior mentality and taking down opponents swift and effectively, leaving no doubt as to who the winner is. But I'm also about honoring the game and the values that it holds and the lessons that it teaches and the respect that it deserves. As our society continues to lose its moral compass, it becomes our responsibility as coaches to make sure sportsmanship doesn't give way to individual attention. Or the next thing you know, you've got a football player who thinks he's 1 in a million, and you have to stop and remind him that he's just 1 in 11. Some of our coaches can use that same lesson. And when you talk about piling up the points to humiliate an opponent or get a late unneeded 3-pointer or touchdown, ask yourself this: what's driving the bus? When it comes to the score and the end of games, there's a difference between being commanding and just being loud. Look, I get the counter arguments as well. The last thing we want to do is tell our kids to quit playing. That just leads to injuries and underdeveloped players who never get game experience. But like I said last week, it's all in the packaging, and the how you do things becomes important. Constantly pressing, fast breaking, shooting threes is probably the wrong recipe if you're looking to invest in your reputation. Passing the ball late with a bazillion point lead just to get more points probably isn't going to win you any friends in the brotherhood of coaching. Remember, pride is concerned with who is right. Humility is concerned with what is right. And that lack of humility, which goes hand in hand with respect, is what's missing when these things happen. Couple that with your reputation and ask yourself, what do you want to be known for? My dad once told me, pride and ego lack the ability to be humble. Pride makes us artificial. Humility makes us real. And I've never forgotten that. And I've tried to let that guide me through my coaching career. And I've made my share of mistakes, but I do know that the true mark of a great coach is helping mold a good person and not breaking the bulbs on a scoreboard. It's funny how winning tends to happen after that, because winning is just a byproduct of doing things the right way. Take the win, be humble, be confident. But remember, confidence without compassion and humility, it's just arrogance. I'll leave you with the words of one of the greatest coaches ever, Ted Lasso, who said, "I believe you can outscore your opponent and still lose, just like you can score less than them and still win." And those are Scott's thoughts.